legends may live, where we explore the mysterious, the unexplained, and the downright eerie. I'm Drew, and today we're diving into a case that has haunted Vermont for over 70 years, the Bennington Triangle. A place where people vanish without a trace, leaving behind only unanswered questions. Was it a serial killer, supernatural forces, or something even stranger? The Bennington Triangle is a name given to an area of southwestern Vermont, centering around Glastonbury Mountain. The heavily forested, isolated regions gained notoriety for its ghost stories, UFO sightings, and strange disappearances. To the Abenaki Native Americans, it was considered cursed, a place they avoided at all costs. They believed it was home to the winds that change direction, a warning about unpredictable, deadly forces. Glastonbury Mountain itself was once a bustling mining town, now completely abandoned since the late 1800s, adding a eerie layer to the mystery that surrounds it. But what truly cements the Bennington Triangle as a place of legend are the unexplained disappearances. Between 1945 and 1950, 5 people vanished under bizarre circumstances. Their cases remain unsolved to this day. On November 12, 1945, a 74-year-old hunting guide named Mitty Rivers was leading a group of hunters through the remote Hill Hollow area. Mitty was no stranger to the Vermont wilderness. He had spent decades navigating the dense forests and steep rides of the mountains. And while he was 74, he hadn't lost a step. It wasn't unusual for the younger men in his groups to have trouble keeping pace with him. And just like the many times before, this trip was no different. Confident in his surroundings and with an extra spring in his step, when the hunters needed a break, Mitty continued on. They had agreed to meet back at the camp later that evening. But after the hunters caught their breath and eventually made their way back to camp, fully expecting Mitty to have beaten them there, he was nowhere to be seen. The men, knowing Mitty's reputation, decided that he was likely just enjoying his time outdoors and he would be back later. But night fell, and there was still no sign of him. The men began to worry. They spread out the search, with one going back to call the authorities. An extensive search was launched, and for weeks hundreds of people combed the area looking for any sign of Mitty. Search parties used scent-tracking hounds to scour the area. It became so involved that even the U.S. Army began helping in the search. The only trace ever found was a single rifle cartridge in a nearby stream. No signs of struggle, no blood, no shreds of clothing, just that cartridge. Could he have fallen into a hidden ravine that to this day has gone undisturbed? Or did something stranger befall him? Next is probably the most infamous case. Paula Weldon, an 18-year-old college student at Bennington College, was bright, artistic, and full of life. She was known for her love of painting and music and was just an overall pleasant young woman with a bright future ahead. But on December 1st, 1946, she was working in the college dining hall, and after finishing her shift, she goes back home to get cleaned up. She was getting ready to go out, and Paula told her roommate that she was going for a hike on the Long Trail. The Long Trail is a famous hiking trail in Vermont. It's the oldest long-distance hiking trail in the United States. She wore a red parka, jeans, and sneakers, which wasn't exactly the warmest choice for the chilly Vermont evening, which suggested she didn't plan to be out there for very long. She got to the trail, and as she walked, she passed several other people who were out for a hike as well. She exchanged pleasant nods and smiles with everyone that she came across as she enjoyed her walk, but the afternoon turned into evening, then eventually night, and her roommate noticed she had not returned yet. Initially, she was concerned, but then she thought, you know what? She's probably just ran into some friends and she's out having fun. But the next morning, she didn't show up for class. That was very out of character for Paula, so concern grew among her classmates and professor, to the point where Paula's father, Archie Weldon, was called, and a search was launched later that day. The search gained momentum pretty quick, and it became one of the largest efforts in Vermont's history at the time. Over the course of several weeks, hundreds of volunteers, police officers, and military personnel covered the area looking for any signs of Paula. Bloodhounds were brought in, but they weren't even able to pick up a scent. The Civil Air Patrol searched over the Long Trail from the sky, and the FBI even got involved, fearing maybe she was abducted and taken across state lines. In spite of all these efforts, nothing was ever found. No belongings, not even footprints. The only evidence that she was ever out there were the multiple eyewitness testimonies. Then things get even stranger. James Tedford, World War II veteran who had just been off visiting his family in St. Albans, grabs his bags, headed to the bus station, and boarded the bus back to his home in Franklin, Vermont. He exchanged pleasantries with the driver as he made his way up the steps. Then, after finding an empty seat, he tucked his bag away and settled in and enjoyed some small talk with a few other passengers. After a long ride, the bus pulled up to his stop. He got off and headed home. But when he arrived home, he was devastated to find that his wife had disappeared without a trace while he was away. His neighbors told him that she had just left. It's not known if he ever looked for her, but no missing persons case was ever filed. Still, no one really knows what happened to her. On December 1st, 1949, a broken-hearted James packed up his belongings once again. He had decided he couldn't stay in the home that reminded him of his wife and the painful truth that she was gone. He headed back to the bus station to board the bus to Bennington. He was going to move into the Bennington soldiers' home. Trying to keep a positive attitude, James again boarded the bus, greeted the driver, and sat down in the seat all to himself. He did share some small talk, some polite conversation with the passengers in the seats across the aisle, but it quickly drifted off and the ride continued in relative silence. At its destination, passengers filed out, but there was one noticeable missing passenger, James. His luggage and personal belongings were still there, undisturbed, but he was nowhere to be seen. There were no stops where he could have gotten off unnoticed. It was as if he had simply faded from existence mid-ride. Investigators interviewed the passengers and driver, and everyone confirmed James was on the bus at the last stop before Bennington, meaning somehow he vanished between stops. Still, they conducted a route check, retracing the bus's stops, but there was no evidence of him getting off anywhere. The soldier's home was also searched, but everywhere authorities looked, it was just one dead end after another. Ultimately, they wrote it off as there were no signs of foul play and no evidence that James had suffered any ill fate. Next, there was Paul Jepsen. He was an energetic and curious 8-year-old boy. Paul's family lived on a farm, so he spent most of his time running around outside, feeding animals, climbing trees, just being a rambunctious little boy. October 12th, 1950 started just like any other day. Paul's father got up early, went off to work on the farm. His mother got up and got him dressed for the day, and they went out to look after the animals. Finally, they got to the pigs, and his mother went in the pen to feed them while Paul stayed in the truck, just outside the gate, only a few feet away from his mother. In the few moments it took to complete her chore, his mother turned around to move to the next task and realized Paul was gone. She looked all around, calling his name, but there was no answer. Searching and calling, but he just wasn't there. Quickly, an enormous search was called, and over 300 residents and local officials joined in. They searched nearby fields, roads, forests, and anywhere else they could possibly think to look. Bloodhounds were used in this case too, but unlike the others, they were able to pick up Paul's scent. The dogs led searchers to a crossroads near Glastonbury Mountain, but that's where the trail abruptly went cold. Helicopters and small planes searched nearby woods and mountains, and even dragged the ponds and rivers, but still nothing was found. Finally, we have Frida Langer. Frida was a 53-year-old woman who loved the outdoors. She was an experienced hiker, and she would go camping with her family near Somerset Reservoir any chance she got. Frida and some family decided to take another camping trip. It was a nice day, but a bit cold. Still, she and her cousin Herbert decided to do some hiking. It was started off well, but Frida ended up stumbling over some rocks and falling into a stream. She was soaked and miserable, so she decided to go back to camp to change and that she would meet back up with Herbert. They weren't far from camp, about half a mile, so she expected it wouldn't take very long and she would be back on the trail in no time. But as Herbert waited, he started getting impatient. Frida was taking way longer than the trip should have, so he decided to go back himself. But what he found was Frida had never made it back to the campsite. Her family had been there the whole time and never saw her. A bit unnerved, her family started searching, calling her name, but there was no response. Just like the previous cases, a huge search effort was launched, and there were over 400 civilians and officials involved in the search. Blood hounds were used, but they couldn't pick up a scent. There was an aerial search, and even after weeks, there was still nothing to be found. No clothing, no tracks, or any sort of sign that indicated where she could be or what happened to her. Unlike the other cases, her body was eventually found. It was discovered on May 12th, 1951, in an open clearing near Somerset Reservoir, an area that had been extensively searched already. Unfortunately, due to advanced decomposition, authorities weren't able to determine the cause of death. So what could have happened to all these people? Could it be connected? Or is it just some random occurrences? Some speculate that a serial killer lurked in the surrounding woods, but the victims had nothing that really connected them. And with a 5-year span between the disappearances, this theory doesn't really seem to hold water. Not to mention the skill it would take to abduct so many people without a trace and leaving no evidence. There are also those who wonder about the Bennington monster. It's a creature like Bigfoot. There are tales of a massive, hairy creature roaming Glastonbury Mountain, prompting questions about possible attacks or abductions. Other theories abound, suggesting that Glastonbury Mountain houses a portal to another dimension. The Abenaki warned of a cursed land, pleading for us to be aware of vanishing without a trace. Possibly the most disturbing is whispers of feral humans or hidden cults inhabiting the wilderness, potentially engaging in nefarious activities against unsuspecting hikers. Still others suspect it's simply unpredictable weather. Glastonbury's unpredictable weather poses a very real danger. People may have gotten lost in sudden fog or adverse conditions leading to tragic outcomes. So what do you think? Is it the work of a serial killer, a touch of the supernatural, or just bad luck in a treacherous wilderness? Regardless, the Bennington Triangle stands as one of America's most haunting mysteries. And that wraps up today's episode of Legends May Live. Let me know your thoughts, or if you've got a story of your own, we'd love to hear it. You can find us at legendsmaylive.com or on social media. Make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share with a friend who loves a good eerie tale. Until next time, keep your eyes open, keep a lookout, because it turns out legends may live.